talk a little more about that. So let's talk about Hazelwood for a moment here and what it really did. So it was a 5-3 decision, involved the administration at Hazelwood East High School in Missouri. And it basically said that in fact, the school could censor controversial articles in the school newspaper. The ruling was a bit complicated though. It's not a real clear understanding, or a lot of people don't have a real clear understanding of what this case did. And administrators get confused about what it empowered them to do as well. But basically the ruling is that they can limit the personal expression of students if that expression can reasonably be perceived to bear the imprimatur of the school. And I had to look that term up. It's interesting, that's a Latin phrase that really does mean let it be printed. And it goes back to the church, Roman Catholic Church being allowed to print religious text and material. So it's interesting to see it come back in the Supreme Court ruling. In other words, the court created a different standard for school-sponsored speech than what they call student-initiated speech. And in this case, the newspaper was considered to be school-sponsored speech. And there's some important distinctions that have to be made. There's some schools that have made a really good big point of calling their paper a public forum. And in that case, they can assert a little more in terms of rights, but you also have to have a lawyer to assert those rights. And it gets expensive and hard to fight these fights sometimes when you're a teacher without a budget to fight. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, so let's get into New Voices and what this is about for a moment. And this is, I guess, near and dear to my heart. I live in Texas without a New Voices law, and it's interesting to see that 17 states have passed these laws, and that it is spreading over time. There's some of these laws that have existed even before the Hazelwood decision, which is interesting. Unfortunately, this Hazelwood decision dramatically changed the balance of student press rights. It's much more heavily weighted in favor of administration at this point when it comes to making these calls and decisions. And so there's currently this ongoing effort to advocate for states to pass these laws to really clarify what their roles are. That's the trickiest thing here. What is the role of the administrator? What is the role of the advisor and, of course, the student in these processes here? The most recent state to pass one of these laws is West Virginia. It just happened earlier this year. And so it's really interesting to see how this movement has been spreading across the country here. And ultimately, last bullet point there is that these laws reduce these incidents of censorship by clarifying these roles. And if we can move on to the next slide, I think we have a map to show. Yeah, here we go. So these are the 17 states. You can see where they're all over the country here. It really is like a student movement. Like I'm involved in Texas here, helping to support our students that are advocating for this. They're learning about the legislative process and learning how to advocate for themselves and what they have to do to contact lawmakers and things. So it's a process to get a law like this passed. It doesn't happen overnight for sure.
And yes, if you want to learn more about New Voices, Kate, thank you for putting the link in there for the Student Press Law Centers and their New Voices. And so, yeah, in California, I'm in California, and California actually has a law in the books that predates the Hazelwood decision. So California Ed Code 48907 was approved way back in the mid-70s. And so that gives students pretty much the same journalism rights that the professional press have. And then also about maybe within the last couple of decades, the law has been updated to also protect advisors so that they don't get punished, such as firing, suspension, whatever, for something that their students published. And so about a year ago, actually a year ago this September, I was given a 3-day suspension for refusing to remove some information from a story that my students published back in November 2021. And the school clearly violated the state ed code since advisors are protected from, being punished for something their students published. And so, the information of the story was accurate. There's, the writing was, well done. The reporting was done well as well. And so, the students, I teach the students to have a strong foundation in journalism and ethics as well. And so my students turn to the Student Press Law Center for guidance on, how to proceed. And, the Student Press Law Center attorneys said, we were in the right. We didn't have to take anything down. And so, we stood our ground. And, my suspension was ultimately reversed. The district rescinded it after 2 weeks. A lot of public support and a lot of media that even, it was pretty much made national headlines as well. And so, thankfully, we were backed by the California Ed Code, which gives students and, protections for advisors as well. So it's always good to make sure that you know what the rights are in your area, especially if you're in a New Voices state. And then if you're not in a New Voices state, it's always good to have a good relationship with your administrators, and hopefully they understand the importance of a free press. All right, and so next we're going to get back into Checology and the curriculum. And let's see. So if we can get on to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. All right, so Student Press Law Center. So if you advise publications, make sure that your students are aware of the Student Press Law Center and how to contact them, because usually it should be the students who are contacting them. And they often meet with students, and so they have a hotline that you can contact and someone will get back to you. And especially if it's something that, you're being threatened with a lawsuit or facing imminent censorship, indicate that on your in the form that you fill out on their website so that they can contact you, obviously within 3 business days. But, if you haven't made your students aware about the SPLC, definitely make sure that you do. They're a great resource. And, often, when we contact them, because we've had contact them before previously several times, doesn't always make headlines. Obviously, you try to avoid, going or making headlines, but they're a great resource, and it's a free and they're a nonprofit organization. All right, so now let's get back to Checology curriculum. And the Checology lessons have a variety of subject areas, as you can see, and these are all modules that you can organize and pick and choose which ones you want your students to focus on. And, it's a lot from news to information, misinformation, lessons on democracy, understanding bias. Some of the new ones are a new one is conspiratorial thinking. And another new one that I really like and it's very engaging is it's called Power in Art, and it's about editorial cartoons and artists. And I have a lot of artistic students, so they really get into that one. And then one module that my students often find enlightening is press freedoms around the world, because they don't often realize that not everyone has the freedoms that we have here in the United States. So when they hear what happens to journalists in other countries, it kind of opens their eyes, and it makes them wonder and question the governments in some of the other countries as well. All right, so we're going to take a quick preview of Checology's First Amendment unit. And so, Miriam, if you can click on that, hopefully we can see a part of it. And one thing that I don't know if I mentioned or we mentioned earlier, but one of the things I really like about Checology is that they use professional journalists in the modules. So they have someone, hosting or being the presenter in these. And so it kind of adds another element of authenticity to the lessons. All right, so we can play that. Oh, if we can get the audio.
The 5 freedoms are, let's talk about, did you get them all? I hope so. So now that you know what the 5 freedoms are, let's talk about why they're so important. Without these 5 freedoms, religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition, the United States would be unrecognizable. In fact, they form the bedrock of our nation's commitment to individual rights and civic responsibilities. Americans have invoked these 5 freedoms in every important struggle for social justice and civil liberties throughout our nation's long history. But we invoke them in our everyday lives as well. Every time you express yourself in class, every time you post something on social media, wear a t-shirt with a slogan, watch a live stream of an important event, join a protest of any kind, practice your religion, or choose to practice no religion at all, you are exercising your First Amendment rights.
All right, so there, I like that because it not only tells students, what the rights are, but then also how they're using it. And sometimes the students don't realize that they're using them until it's pointed out to them. And then, they get surprised or get happy that they're like, oh, okay, I already know this. I already know the right that I have. And so that's what I like about Checology. And then something else that I like about it too, and some of you, maybe if you're in a school that, or if you love data, or maybe your school or the district, is very data driven, you can do pre and post assessments of the students to know where they are, and then, where their knowledge is after they've completed a module. And so here, the bottom row is an example of a pre and post assessment that I did at the start of the First Amendment module. And so at the beginning, only 52% of the students were able to name the rights that they had. And then by the end of the module of the First Amendment, 96% of the students were able to name all 5 of the freedoms that they have. So that was a pretty good jump. And as you can see, even from the other one, the one on the top, it was from another module, I believe, and it was on propaganda. And so at the beginning, only 39% knew what propaganda was. And after that, 61% did. So you can see there's, a pretty remarkable increase in knowledge. And so you can pick and choose, whether you want the pre and post assessments, just to give you an idea of where, students, how much students are learning. And so that's what I, like to do. And so, those of you who maybe are in districts where data is the rule, then, that would be very helpful for you. And let me see in the next slide. Yeah, in the next slide, you can see how, once you're in the Checology module, which you need to sign in, and we're going to walk you through how to sign in, but you can, customize it and say, okay, yes, I want them to do the surveys. I want them to do the pre and post assessments. If you don't want them to do that, then, you can easily turn that off. And then you can also sign in with your single sign-on. So if you use, like my school, we use Schoology, others use Clever. I'm not sure what other ones some people use, but there's different single sign-ons that people can use so that students don't have to remember a lot of passwords, because kids often forget them. If they're like mine, they forget their passwords all the time. But if, they have a single sign-on, they pretty much remember them.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we both like about Checology too is that they're very good about seeking out and listening to feedback from its users, and of course is the students, but also the teachers. And so this is an example of some of the feedback that they received, which shows basically overwhelming positive feelings about using this in their classrooms. And I personally, for me, I think it's just because Checology is a light lift. It is not a burden for me at all to use in my classroom. In fact, it can actually unburden me because it's something that's self-paced. They can do it on their own, and sometimes at their own schedule. And we'll get more into like how you can customize that as well.
All right, so how does Checology use, or what does it look like in my classroom? I only use it on Fridays in the classroom. I don't assign it as homework. I did that one year, and my 9th graders are not big on homework, so I stopped that and I just give them time in class. So I'm lucky that our school, we have, each student has a Chromebook, so they use Chromebooks, they bring them to class every day. And so on Fridays, I dedicate about 20-25 minutes for them to work on Shakeology on their own. Sometimes students, if they don't have their Chromebook with them, they use their phones, and it works well with their phones. Sometimes they like to, put the captions on there, and so they're reading the captions as well. For some reason, they like reading the captions as well as listening as well. And one thing I like about it, like David said, is that it's self-paced. And if students have, wrong answers, they go back and they fix them, or they cannot move on to the next question until they get it correct. And so I have it set so that students cannot skip, because I don't want them jumping around from module to module. So I have it so that, they cannot progress until they're finished with it. And, if they need to, I've had students, work on it at home. Sometimes they say, oh, I was bored, so I was working on it. So that's good that, they're not falling behind. And I do grade them on the modules. I don't grade them hard. I just want to make sure, I can always look and see how they're making progress on them. And if they're, maybe being a bit too slow or falling far behind, then I tell them, to hurry it up and, work on it at home, or when they're, done with their work early in my classroom, they have some time to work on it as well. And so, David, how does it look in your classroom?
Yeah, it's very similar. I also use it more in my journalism 1 class because we have a lot more time to explore in-depth journalism topics. But I do use it, and I intend to use it even more this year in my graphic design classes, which really are our production classes for our newspaper. And in those cases, or in that case, I have students from all over our school that maybe have never been in a journalism class, and I have to do a boot camp basically with them at the beginning of the year. And this is a really easy way for me to give them some basic foundational information about their rights in the First Amendment. There's modules on practicing quality journalism. There's modules on what different type of information is. And so it's just a really good tool because I can use it and I can adapt it for my needs depending on the class that I'm teaching. And it's very adaptable for sure. I forgot one thing I also want to add is that I do like using it sometimes in a whole group scenario. So sometimes I like to project it on a big screen in my room, and we'll watch the videos together, and we can stop and talk about them together to have a little more whole group interaction with it as well. Sorry, go ahead to the next slide. Oh yeah, so besides the modules themselves, there's like a lot of extra bonus content in Shakeology. There are these practice exercises that you can add for supplemental. So there's some little extra quizzes with more content that'll kind of extend learning. Might be like a good, like a GT extension type activity perhaps, or to really just drill, to really, make sure students know these rights backwards and forwards. Shakeology is also good about having challenges. You can set up like a points system to see, who has the most points in your class and things, if that's motivating, kind of a gamification aspect. And it also gives them access to the check center that helps them to detect and debunk misinformation, and then links to just lots of other resources. As you, as an educator with New Voices, with News Literacy, you have just tons of resources in the library that they provide, and we'll talk more about how you get access to that as well.
Right. So if you have any questions that you want to ask us about any of the topics we talked about, if you can put them in the Q&A. Don't put them in the chat because they may get lost in the chat once people, start adding things in there. So if you put them in the Q&A, and then hopefully we can answer them as best as we can. And David, you have one in the Q&A already.
Interesting question. Do we cover memes in your graphic design class? And that is actually built into one of the lessons. Info Zones has a section on there about memes and, what kind of information people are presented with. And obviously, like, memes can be used in different ways. Is it entertainment? Is it propaganda? Is it advertising? Like, there's so many ways memes can be used. And so you kind of really have to understand the context of it, right? Like, what's the content in the meme to determine what the purpose, right? It's always about the purpose of what is this content that I'm seeing here. And I love how Shakeology really is relatable in showing how bombarded we are with information all day long. And it's just very relatable in the way to deliver the content. And we're seeing another question in the chat here, or the Q&A, I should say. So go ahead.
No, I was gonna just read the question. Any thoughts on teaching gatekeeping of mainstream media?
I'd like to know more what you mean by gatekeeping on mainstream media. Are we saying that mainstream media is bad and that you shouldn't always accept its content, or what? Can you help us understand that a little better?
Or I guess Luke was the original poster of that, I guess maybe in the chat.
And while you guys are asking your questions, I did want to talk a little bit about how you get started in Checkology. We can definitely come back and answer more of your questions as you're typing them into the Q&A.
Okay, so Luke wrote that there tends to be bias versus objectivity. So there's also actually a lesson, actually a whole module on understanding bias, which students do. And that's one of the ones that I do give students, because I don't give students, all of the, 24 modules that Checkology offers. And so there is this, whole session that they look, or module that they look on, understanding bias and how to, identify it once they see it, or once they read it, or when they come across it. And I think, in our journalism classes, I think that, bias is something that we always look at. I know that I do, with my publication classes, one of the warm-ups we do pretty much at least once a week, or maybe every 2 weeks, is have them, go onto a publication or publications, 3 different ones, and they look at the same story or same event, but look and see how they're covered by different publications. So that's something that, we often do, just so that they can start seeing how, publications look at or cover events, and, how they are different from one another, and also, why they just decided to focus on this angle as opposed to maybe a different angle. So that, I think bias as a whole, is something that we often discuss in the classroom, but then also Checkology has a good module that's very easy for students to understand and grasp. And David, I don't know if you want to add to that as well.
Yeah, I know that you're right, that there's really good content in Checkology dealing with bias. Also good content explaining about, the differences between, outlets that pay reporters and those that don't, in terms of your information, like where you're getting it from. Is it well researched? Are there editors checking it for truth, and evidence? So yeah, that's all in Checkology, and it's a really good way to facilitate a discussion about these concepts in your class.
Okay, and then Kate in the chat added that about gatekeepers in terms of school administrators feeling they need to be the gatekeepers. At least in my school, I don't have the principal coming in and, asking for peer review or a prior review, whether it's our yearbook or magazine or website. So we don't have that. And I think David mentioned also that he doesn't have that in his school. I think it turns into the sort of, I guess as advisors, we need to kind of educate the principals that we have, our administrators, and kind of let them know, that or kind of pretty much to trust us that we're teaching the students good ethics, good foundations of journalism, reporting, all of that. And sometimes we need to sit down with them and go over that with them, or kind of always remind them on a regular basis that what we're doing is correct. All right, any other questions?
And I just wanted to see, go back to, I think Kate had a comment about gatekeeping as well. It's interesting, I haven't really seen that term used in terms of censoring, because that's really what we're talking about here. The administrator getting involved in that role of, saying what is and what is not allowed. And I always think it's a shame to see, the administrators, get involved in these cases because it feels like they're taking that responsibility away from the students. This is supposed to be a student publication where they're whether it's the opinion section or, in objective news reporting, the content selection process is now being taken away from them because an administrator is skittish, or they're usually always concerned about their image and the image of the school. And that's unfortunate. It's like, I feel like we're taking away that opportunity. And we're also teaching students that it is acceptable for an authority figure to come in and tell you what you can and cannot publish. That's a really disturbing thing whenever I see it happen. So I get a little hot on that one.
Yeah, so that's why early on, we teach, I think both Dave and I teach a unit on student press rights early on in the school year. And, with my publications classes, they're, a bit more advanced. I've had them 3-4 years. We often read about, censorship attempts at other schools or people exercising their press rights. So it's a constant conversation we have. And, the important thing is to, lay that foundation for your students, definitely teaching them ethics and, what to do and what not to do, is always a good practice to do in your newsroom, or, if you have publications, or, even in your journalism classes, introductory classes, just teach them the basics of, so that they know what news is, whether something is worth covering, and, what is something that maybe we will not touch, what sort of stories maybe we will keep away from. And pretty much in my school, we've covered everything, whether it's arrests of people who are, molesting students, we've pretty much, for us, and pretty much nothing has been off topic. And so, I pretty much say, if the LA Times is able to cover it, you should too.
And we'll try to do our best to answer more of your questions. I'd like to talk more about how you get started on Checkology for a moment. Okay, and it's basically as easy as going to our website, right? Checkology.org. And registering as an educator. Make sure you say that you're an educator so that you have the ability to create classes. And as Adriana was saying earlier, Checkology is great that it provides at least, I think, 3 different ways to use a single sign-on, whether it's Google or Microsoft, or I think Clever. I think all those are provided. And it just makes the account creation and having to remember a password so much easier through that process. Adriana, I think this was your slide, but I think we were talking about this a little bit together, like about the customizing tools where this is where you can come in and you can create what order you want things. But what else did you want to add, Adriana?
Yes, you can decide, which topics you want the students to cover. And even, sometimes at the beginning of the school year, I arrange my curriculum from Checkology that I want them to do. I always start with info zones because it kind of teaches them the basics of news, opinion, propaganda, entertainment, stories, ads, because sometimes students aren't aware that ads are, meant to persuade them to purchase something, even though they're always bombarded with ads on social media. They don't understand, the whole purpose of them, but once they do this info zones, they start understanding what those are. They're able to identify them. But even throughout the school year, I start changing things out. Sometimes I add modules in, sometimes I replace them. Sometimes, if we're getting, if I see that we're not progressing as quickly as maybe the previous year, because, students always, have their own little personalities and different abilities. Sometimes I, delete some of the modules from their curriculum. Or, I move things around as well. If I see that, our opinion writing is coming a lot sooner, or we're getting there a lot sooner, then I move the understanding bias and argument units or modules up closer, so that, we're, whatever we're doing with Checkology is supplementing what I teach them in the classroom. So that's what I, always do. I don't just rely on Checkology for their curriculum. I use it to supplement, to make sure that they understand the key points that I'm trying to teach them. And so it's very flexible. And so, that's something that I also really like about the program, is that it's easy to use, and, it's very flexible, and it's very user friendly for the students. At pretty much whatever level your students are, they're able to grasp it. And hopefully one of these days I will be able to use it or make space for it in our publications class, but I often find my students, they're have a lot on their plate. So, the advanced students are not, getting this, but they've all been through it as ninth graders because I pretty much have all of them as ninth graders. All right. And so
All
these
right.
are, I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, this is yours. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, so these are more programs that a news literacy project has, and these are specifically for educators. So, we've been talking a lot about Chacology and the modules that they have, especially the First Amendment unit. They also have a newsletter called The Sift, and it comes out every Monday, and you can get it into your inbox, and it comes ready with some slides that you can present to your students. And they're very topical, pretty much whatever is any sort of misinformation that's been going on, or maybe some social media trends that are maybe not going well, or not or maybe have been altered. They discuss it in there, so it's really good that you can use in the classroom. And so you really don't have to do much to that. They also have something called Newslit Camp and professional learning, and so those are virtual, and some of them are in-person sessions, so that you can learn more about news literacy.
Okay, and along the bottom of our slide there, we talk about Newslit Nation, and that's us basically. That is all of us together building this network of teachers dedicated to teaching news literacy. And the News Literacy Project has been so good to help us, support this network through various means, which we'll talk more about in just a second. There's also their educator resource library, which I mentioned earlier. There are handouts, there's printouts, there's posters, there's just a really valuable wealth of resources that they provide through their accounts that you'll be able to create on their website for the Newslit Nation. There's also the ambassador program, which both Adriana and I are ambassadors with. And there's also in some places a district fellowship grant funded program for certain school districts that want to make this an important initiative in their school district. And
yes, and I put the link to the Newslit Nation on the chat, so you can go in and sign up, so that way you can get resources and also connect with the ambassadors as well. All right, and okay.
Yeah, and so you can definitely use the links that Adriana provided in the chat. Also, there's some QR codes here on the screen. There's two major ways, I guess, the Newslit Nation functions. One is through the accounts that you can create on the website. That'll give you access to these resources and such. But if you would like to have more of a kind of interactive experience with other colleagues with similar interests, we have a Facebook group. And it's not a page, it's a group, meaning that it's only members that join. And so you do need to join the group so that you can engage and have these conversations. And it's kind of a way to discuss this on an ongoing basis with people with similar interests in teaching news literacy. So we encourage you today to join both ways, through the accounts and through the Facebook group as well. Excellent. Thank you for sharing the links in the chat for that as well.
Right. And so you also can become a news literacy project ambassador. There we have openings in various states, and you can see right there what states we're looking for, and you can apply. And it's a part-time position. You pretty much use it when, or you participate when you're able to. You do create events just like this webinar that David and I put together, and they do give you a generous stipend as well. So it's not, you do get rewarded for your time. So that's obviously a added bonus. So if you're interested and you're in one of these states where we have openings, definitely I encourage you to sign up. I'm actually ending my 3rd year and I'm stepping down as an ambassador, so I'm kind of sad about that. But I'm just need to focus on other priorities that I have right now. So definitely, if you're in California, we need ambassadors here.
All right, and I like to reiterate what Miriam was just saying in the chat, that remember, all these resources are free. There's no money ever asked of us as educators to pay for this kind of thing. Hey, talk about more free stuff, prizes. Okay, we have prizes for you today, just for attending, participating, and offering some feedback with a survey. And so we're talking about things like some really nifty reporters notebooks, some stickers, and some various swag items that will be sent to you guys after today's meeting if you complete the survey. There's me holding some swag at a convention, it looks like. All right, and then actually we should talk about, there's the link to the survey right there. So you can scan that QR code on your phone right now if you have it in front of you. There's also a link that we can put into the chat if that's easier for you. Very, simple, basic questions about your interests in today's content, some feedback about how we did, and then also some questions about how you might use these resources in your class.
And while people are answering that, Kent had another question in the chat. I'm sorry, in the Q&A. Are schools financially liable for student news production? Does that make a difference in freedom claims? No, I mean, I guess that's one of the reasons why, as advisors, we need to make sure that we teach students, obviously libel, slander, all of those, and practice good ethics as well as journalists. And so, then hopefully you wouldn't come across any sort of lawsuit against people. And that's why also it's good for students and advisors to know the laws in your state, so that you know what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. That way you can always make sure. And then also SPLC is a good place to go and find out, whether you are in the right to do that or whether you're able to or not able to. So they're always a good source for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's another reason why we always contact the Student Press Law Center as well. If there was a story that was so controversial that we were worried about some kind of financial liability, we would get it lawyered. We would get that story lawyered through the Student Press Law Center to make sure that we're not stepping into any of those territories. And I think that's actually a little bit of maybe a way to shield the principal as well. If it's the advisor and the students that are taking on that responsibility instead of the administrator, I don't know, that might be just an additional way to provide some protection from the school as well, if it's a really student, driven work.
All right, any other questions? Okay, and hopefully all of you are filling out the survey. All right, so I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I know many of you are on summer break, and thank you for taking time out from your break and joining us.
Yeah, we're grateful that you're here, and thank you for listening. If you have any other questions, you can reach out to us. Of course, we have our social media contacts here for you as well, and we look forward to you guys getting involved.
Yeah, and if anything comes up, any other questions after the fact, you can also contact us on the Facebook page that Newslet Nation has, because there have been posts on there on this webinar, so you can put any other questions. Sometimes an event ends and you're like, oh, I should have asked this, or you don't think about something until after the fact. Feel free to post something on there, and we can answer there as well. Right, thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
Great start of your school year.
Absolutely. Good luck, everyone.